Hello, my name is Richard Smith, and as you know, I'm the author of the book, Such a Mind as This, Biblical Theological Study of Thinking in the Old Testament. And I have with me today a new friend, Elmer Thiessen, who I'm anxious to introduce to you and have you to learn from, and particularly in terms of his focus for his current book project, but I'll let him tell you about that. So, Elmer, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for having me. Who am I? I'm a philosopher. I started out in science. My first degree is actually in science. And then I made the mistake of taking a philosophy course and got hooked on it. My first philosophy teacher was an ex-Baptist atheist. And he loved poking fun at the Billy Graham column in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, for about 10 minutes. And then he would go and start doing philosophy. So that was my introduction to philosophy. But I loved the challenge and continued pursuing it, finished with a PhD at the University of Waterloo, writing a book on indoctrination.
Wow.
And that dissertation on indoctrination, and that led to my first book, Teaching for Commitment. Wrote another book on In Defense of Religious Schools and Colleges. And then switched. The theme of my research for writing has been the ethics of influence, the ethics of persuasion. And so I switched into evangelism. I was very concerned about the ethics of evangelism. Wrote 2 books on that, and that has led me to my current project on intellectual virtues and vices, which I think you want to talk about a bit more.
Yes. So if you could define in sort of broad categories the viceness and virtueness, if I can use those words, of intellectual virtues. In other words, maybe examples, or another way to put it maybe is, and it'll obviously be implicit in what you say, is why is it important? Why study it? Why write about it?
I've come to the conclusion that we're facing tremendous divisiveness within society as a whole, the United States, Canada as well. Most recently about vaccines and their efficacy and their use, growing political polarization in the United States. And I've become very concerned about the divisions and the growing polarizations. And too often we think that a little bit more information, a little bit more argument will be able to solve these problems. We'll be able to come to agreement, and it just doesn't work. And so my reason for this focus is I think we need to back up a bit and look instead at the ethics of believing, the ethics of persuasion, and also the ethics of using our minds. And that maybe the problems that we're facing in terms of this growing polarization have to do with the vices of the mind. We're being closed-minded. We don't listen carefully. We don't really want to know the truth. We're quite happy within our own biases. And so part of my concern has been to address this problem that I see is growing, also within the Christian church, sadly.
Yes.
Huge divisions within the church.
Yes.
In Canada here, just heard of a former student of mine who is now a pastor, who had to resign because the church was so split on the issue of vaccines.
Oh my goodness.
And again, I feel we need to back up and say, look, are we approaching this in an ethical way? Are we using our minds in an ethical way? Are we being genuinely open-minded, loving the truth, wanting to check out what the truth is about vaccines?
And when you mention open-mindedness, you're not talking about that in the modern postmodern or relativistic way that, it's ultimate paradigmatic, philosophical open-mindedness to whatever point of view. You're viewing that, I assume, within the parameters of your Christian worldview.
Yes, I think there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding open-mindedness.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I don't think there is such a thing as an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the confusions is open-mindedness is often confused with empty-mindedness.
Yes.
And there are no empty minds. Descartes was fundamentally mistaken when he tried to doubt everything till he come to rock bottom.
Yes.
John Locke was fundamentally mistaken when he said the mind is a blank tabula rasa.
Right.
It isn't. So we have convictions, and
Yes.
the most we can do is admit to the best we can do is admit that we have these convictions, and then also admit that we might be wrong.
Yeah.
So in this chapter that where I dealt with open-mindedness, I've actually said I think we need to discard this notion and instead look at something what I call committed openness. It sounds like an oxymoron, but I don't think it is. We are committed, and at the same time, we should be open to reevaluating our position. Leslie Newbigin has written a book called Proper Confidence. And I think that the key is a healthy mind is properly confident, admits that we have convictions, and yet is open to reevaluating those convictions, is willing to listen to others who have opposite convictions, and then reassess those convictions. So I'm starting with open-mindedness, but I think you're right. That has been badly distorted in modern thinking.
Sure. And when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the 3 or 6, if I remember correctly, virtues that you wanted to emphasize. And so I wonder, for those who are watching, what would they be, and why did you select those particular ones?
Sure. I started out with 3 very, very important intellectual virtues, and I really had trouble deciding which was the most important one. The first I start with is the love of knowledge and truth. And sometimes this has been viewed as sort of a catch-all for all of the virtues.
Yes.
I'm treating it as a separate one because I think it deserves separate treatment. Do we honestly and sincerely want to know the truth? Do we want to face the facts? So I'm starting with that. The next one, and here again, a good case can be made. This is the most important one, and that is intellectual humility.
Yes.
The Bible has an amazing amount, and in reviewing Scripture, I was amazed to see how often the Bible talks about humility, and once you look carefully, how often it talks about intellectual humility. You don't know everything.
Right.
The most extended treatment of intellectual humility is found in 1 Corinthians chapters 1 to 3.
Yes.
Where Paul seems to be exaggerating the foolishness of the gospel to somehow bring us to our proper assessment of who we are and how puny our intellects really are. The third then is open-mindedness, which I've already talked about, which I want to then steer toward proper confidence or committed openness.
Yes.
Those are the 3 major intellectual virtues. Other virtues that could be mentioned, intellectual courage, especially that comes to the fore, especially in cases where there's a stifling of opinion. Intellectual generosity. Are we reading carefully? Are we reading fairly? Are we representing positions that differ from ours in a fair way? Intellectual fairness, intellectual generosity. What's another one? These are 2. important virtues that I can think of.
That's actually quite interesting, as we were talking earlier. And as you were talking, I thought about a theme that I'm stressing down here, where I live in South America, among the Christians that I know, who lack intellectual curiosity. And even when you find it, are not at all aware about what voices they're listening to, and who is informing their mind and their mindset. So this was the question. What's your thought about, or how would you advise somebody, and I don't know if we can call it a virtue, perhaps we can, intellectual self-awareness? In other words, what is informing the way I think, which then obviously informs the way I think and behave and so forth and speak? Intellectual self-awareness is a theme I've been pushing down here. And I just thought I'd throw it out to you now that I had you, to see if you have any thoughts about it.
You're just pushing me to think of another chapter in my book.
Oh, well,
I rather like that. I rather like that. I find that there's a lack of intellectual awareness, especially on the part of those who are on the liberal end of the theological spectrum. They talk a lot about being very open and very tolerant, but I find very often they're not aware of the fact that their thinking is fairly straitjacketed.
Yes.
And they'll allow for freedom of thought within a certain parameter. So I rather like that. Yes, I would certainly, I need to think some more about that. But I think also in terms of our reading habits. Yes. Are we aware of our reading habits? Yes. And I find many people are not. They're only looking at reading books and articles that reinforce their position, and are really unaware of the fact that they should be studying other writers. Sure, sure. And that's among the people who read, which is a smaller and smaller part of the population, and right. People who can read at a level that fosters discernment. So you also have to factor in, I'm sure you'd agree, the influence of social media and Facebook, YouTube, television, movies, popular culture. All of those things impact the way that we think and act. And when I read the Bible, I see that God holds us responsible for the way we think. We're not, and hold us responsible for what we read. Yes. Think of the passage in Philippians, I think it is. Yes. Whatsoever is right and true and good, think about these things. Yes. Yes. I'm not sure we Christians are being disciplined enough in this area. That maybe there's something we shouldn't be looking at all. Yes. Yes. Maybe there's some websites that we should simply eliminate and not look at. Well, I think that there'll probably going to be a future interview, you and I talking again about this subject after we've thought about it some more, because I think it's crucial. But I thought if we could sum up a little bit here in reference the intellectual virtues or the ethics of thinking that you've been talking about with the Great Commandment, which is obviously out of Deuteronomy 6, and Jesus quotes it as the biggest, the most important commandment: love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So I think I probably answered my own question, but I welcome any input or observations that you have about the connection between intellectual virtue or intellectual piety, maybe we can call it that, and the Great Commandment. Yeah, I rather like the term intellectual piety because it combines two things that are often separated, I think, among Christians. You have those who stress piety a lot and those who stress intellect a lot, and we need to bring those two together. And I have found that I think especially academics are weak in the piety element, and that's tragic. I mean, loving finally is something that we're passionate about, and so we need to love God passionately with our intellect, but also passionately with our whole being, with our strength, as you point out in your book and in the article that's coming out soon in the Evangelical Review of Theology. So I certainly see a link between the intellectual virtues and loving God with heart, soul, strength, and mind.
Yes, I'm having this cognitive dissonance because I have so many thoughts occurring in my brain and connections and avenues that we could pursue, but we can save those for another day, let them cook a little further. But I really appreciate your time and appreciate your insights, and I'm pretty confident God will use this for his cause, of which I think we're both committed, which is trying to learn, as we talked about, mental piety, or Proverbs say the fear of the Lord, or there's various expressions in the Old Testament. But again, I thank you, Elmer, for participating today.
And thank you for having me.
God bless you.